Hello everybody. In my last video I talked about how the light on your planet shrimp tank is the engine that makes everything go. Sometimes I think we forget just how important the light is in our planet shrimp tanks. So obviously plants need a light to grow. I talked about that. Biofilm needs light to grow, and that is the ickiness and algae, and the good kind of algae we want that grows on all the surfaces, all in the plants, on the substrate, on the rocks, on the wood. And that's the stuff that your shrimp are going to be grazing on and eating 24 hours a day, even when you haven't freshly thrown food in. Plant growth equals nutrient uptake. So if your plants are growing better and better light, they're using up more nutrients in the water that we don't want. And that means your shrimp are going to be doing better with their cleaner, better water parameters. And I also talked in that video about how some of my tanks just weren't doing as well. And after pondering this subject on why are these tanks just not doing it, I come to the conclusion that all of the tanks that were struggling all had really dim old lights. Some of them had multiple lights where one was burned out. And these tanks were just underperforming. And I realized the one thing they all had in common was the lights were pretty crappy in them. And so I replaced those lights about 2 weeks ago now. And let me tell you, the difference is huge in all these tanks. Since I've replaced the lights, I've seen no dead shrimp. I've seen more buried females. And the shrimp are much more active. Now the tanks I got new lights in we're going to go over are a 75-gallon red shrimp tank, 75-gallon green jade shrimp tank, a 40-gallon blue dreams tank, a 40-gallon blue velvet tank, and my 4 20-gallon longs. And here we are at my 75-gallon red shrimp tank. And you can see here these are the red sakuras on my website, markshallaquatics.com. But I have the moss in here has been exploding since I put on these new lights. They are doing so good. Look at all the new growth tips on the moss. Now, I use this moss in almost pretty much all my tanks. And the good thing about this pilo moss is it grows based on light conditions. So it will look completely different. Like right here, you can tell it's still under the shade of the sponge here. You can see how it's thin and wispy and reaching for the light. And then like right here, it grows thick and dense. Well, we want the thick and dense because that is what is growing the best. That is what is using the most nutrients in the water. And that gives the shrimp more surface area to be in and the babies to hide. And shrimp are just happier when they have hiding places and the moss is growing. We're using up nutrients in the water. And so this tank is doing really good. Now, it used to have, I've had these are old aquanites. They're just little 2-foot lights. And I've had these on here forever. And they still work, so I left them on. But the main deal here is I used to have 2 20-watt lights on here. And this thing was very successful when those were brand new. And these aquanites were brand new. But as time goes and goes and goes, the lights get dimmer and dimmer and dimmer. And you don't realize it because you're looking at the tank every day and it just gradually gets dimmer and dimmer and dimmer. And so then when you do get new lights, you're like, oh my gosh, this is more than twice as bright. It's ridiculous. And I was having problems like in this tank. The problem that kept happening was I kept having buried females who would try to molt and would have failed molts. Now, I don't understand. It's a problem I've never had in any other tank before, but it was doing it in this tank. And I have not seen any of that since. Now, it wasn't like all my shrimp are dying. It was just like, oh man, there's another one. It'd be, you know, 2 or 3 a week. And there's still babies in here, but I've been selling a lot of these shrimp on the website, and it's hard to keep up with. And same with all the other tanks that weren't doing as good. I was thinking, what in the world is going on? And like I said, I realized all the tanks had really dim old lights. And I think I figured it out. I think I was correct, because after 2 weeks, no more problems, more buried females, everyone looks good. And not only does the new good light make everything do better, it really makes the colors on the shrimp pop. So in here, this is the 75-gallon green jade shrimp tank, and we've got quite a few shrimp in here. They're doing good. This tank never really was struggling super hard, but the numbers were just not doing that good. I've been selling a lot. They weren't bouncing back as quick from when I'd been selling a lot of shrimp out of here. But now, and you could tell the moss was looking really weird. And just in 2 weeks, it's forming. It's more dense. Like, this moss has been in here. This is all, they started off as 2 clumps. Probably, I think I redid this tank sometime in December or January. And that's all the moss has grown. And that's not, the crypts are doing all right. The crypts, all the old leaves except for a couple few old ratty leaves have kind of faded off, but look at all the new dense growth in here. They're doing all right with the blah lights, but the moss wasn't. And the shrimp, like I said, there's lots and lots of buried ones in here. The shrimp are doing really good. I need to come through here and do some culling on these guys. But again, this is a 75-gallon tank, and we had the 2 20-watt bulbs that I've had on here forever. They're still on here. They weren't burned out. So we have 2 20-watt LEDs that are kind of maybe not even half of what they should be. And then we've got 2 of the brand new guys as well that are 40 watts. So we got 80 watts there, and 2 20-watt bulbs that are kind of not really doing so hot. But as you can see, these guys are doing really good. I think it's really made a big difference. Again, I never really saw dead shrimp in this tank. Just not as much breeding as I'd like to see. If we look closely, there's a huge portion of females that are buried. And that's always good when you're trying to make more shrimp. So I think, and just the moss growing and doing better is going to have a big impact, because I've always seen a huge correlation with moss growth and shrimp doing good. So you need some decent light. You don't need awesome light, but you need enough light. Too much light, you run into even more problems. But not enough light, I don't know if you're gonna cause bad problems, but you're limiting your shrimp success, in my belief. So, better lights, but not too much light, and your shrimp tank's going to be doing a whole lot better. And here we are at the 40-gallon Blue Dreams tank, and would you just look at this? The pluggos in this tank have decided to have a gigantic spawn. I'm not even trying to get them to spawn. I'm not even trying to get the babies to live. But it looks like they've all lived, and so now I'm going to have a whole bunch of common chocolate bristlenose pluckos on the website. Just from this tank. Oh my goodness. But again, this tank had an old Aquaneat, 3-foot Aquaneat light, the same as this, and as you can tell, there's a whole bunch of crap up here, but this tank does really good. When they're brand new, these lights do a very good job. But you're looking at around $40 some for one of these, and that's pretty good. I mean, that's as good as you're gonna find for a 3-foot LED light that will grow plants. But when you come over here and you see this 80 watt, now it is 4-foot, that is a problem. It is a 4-foot light, and so it kind of goes in here weird in it. Unless you have a 4-foot tank or a 40-gallon breeder that you can lay it diagonal. If you have smaller tanks, that can be a problem. But I have all these tanks and I can't buy a super nice light for each and every single one of them, so I make do with, I'm always not going cheap, but going best value, best bang for your buck, and I feel like these lights do a pretty good job of that. Now you can tell, look how bad this Rotala looks in here. And just in the last couple weeks, we've got lots of new growth. We've got growth down here at the bottom. This was just bare stems all the way from there all the way up to right there. Like from here to there was nothing but bare stems until it got up high enough where the light was, there's enough light for that to grow, because Rotala is at least usually about a medium. It needs at least medium light. And look at the moss growing so thick and dense. I talk about moss growth growing thick and dense. I'll show you something what I'm talking about. So a quick look at one of these guppy tanks, and it just has an old, almost burned out 20-watt bulb, 20-watt light, and you can see what I'm talking about, how the moss grows thin and wispy like this. It's really slow growing. It just kind of not doing so good. I mean, there are some shrimp in here, but this is a guppy tank. But you can see what I'm talking about when compared to, this is my 40-gallon Bloody Mary tank, and it still has the ×2 20-watt LED bulbs, but they are doing really good still. And this tank has always boomed. This tank has always been one of my best performing. And I've had this great big clump of moss, and the light's right here, the moss is right there. And under good bright light, look at how this moss grows. And this tank always does unfreaking believable. That picture says all you need to know right there. This tank blows my mind. It's got all this moss in this corner, always has ever since I set it up, because the moss just naturally wants to do really, really good right here, because light, moss, light, moss, really close together, and it likes it, and it makes it real happy. And when the moss is real happy, in my experience, the shrimp are real happy as well. So now I didn't put a new light on this one because this one was still doing good. You can tell it's still nice and bright. Now this part of the tank is getting shaded out because not only is the moss happy, all this Anubias is super happy. The Anubias has outdone the mermaid weed I had in here. So that's my explanation of how you can tell the moss growing in the light conditions. And when you see moss growing like this, the shrimp always do good. In my experience and in my water conditions. Now this is my 40-gallon blue velvet tank, and this tank has done something really cool. Now on this tank, it had the two 20-watt bulbs, but the one burned out completely, and the one that was left was really old and really worn out. So we had maybe like 10 or 15 watts worth of light on this tank, and it has really struggled. But look at the Rotala. The Rotala has just gone bananas. Now it's like growing sideways and spreading because it's got so much light. it was never doing that until I put this new light on here a couple weeks ago. And then another cool thing that I've noticed is this moss right here. Now, when you have a tank like this, the current, the way I have my tank infiltration set up, the current is blowing everything over here. So this part of the tank is always really clear, and then stuff wants to settle over here. We have little pieces of moss. It almost looks like green dust. I mean, it's like that. Like this section right here in my Skittles tank will do the same thing when I let the Rotala get too crazy, and the Rotala shades out this bit of moss. It kind of withers down. Here, look at the Skittles. Whew. Those guys are looking real nice. But the moss will kind of wither down, almost look like green dust. But when you add in a good light, in 2 weeks, it was just like chunks of little tiny pieces of moss that broke off and floated around the current and ended up settling over here. They are now becoming their own moss mat here in the Blue Velvet tank. And while this tank, I never seen dead shrimp in here. I just knew the plants were doing horrible in here. Obviously, this tank had less light than any tank. But now, I'm seeing lots of little shrimp, buried females. This tank is doing really good. And I think the new good light has played a part in it. Let's go take a look at the 420 highs. Now these are my 420 highs. We got a shrimp tank, we got a blue jelly tank, we've got a snowball tank, and we've got my top of the line blue dreams that I've recently reset. That is doing really good. And we've got my guppy mad scientist mixing shrimp tank going on here. Now, would you just look? Now this is really thin and wispy. If you go back, and anytime this tank was in a video like a month ago, it was, you know, it didn't really have that much light on it. And the moss was really wispy, and now look how thick it's getting. There's tons of shrimp in there. I noticed lots of this tank never really did struggle. This tank has always been doing good, even with not the best light, but I suspect it's going to start doing even better. And then right next to that one, we've got the snowballs, and this tank has been doing good, but the moss was really thin and wispy. The moss wasn't really doing that good. And you know, I sell a lot of moss, so I need moss as well. More moss growth means, like I said, the shrimp usually always do better for me. And then this tank is doing spectacularly. I reset this tank, called down only the very best blues. Everything else went in the Skittles tank. And now look at all these little babies we've got. These blue dreams always do so good. And look how nice this moss looks. Now this is a bare bottom tank, mind you. And look how good that looks. That is short, thick, compact, not reaching for the light. So good. Then over here in the guppy tank, this is my mad scientist mixing guppies. And look, I'm gonna have to do a guppy video. I always said I was going to do updates when we started having stuff happen here, and we've got little babies, guppies. So this tank is doing good as well. So I just want to remind you guys just how important the light is in your shrimp tanks. Now, there's something I think I forgot, and I was reminded and made that my last video, and I want to show you guys just how much better my tanks are doing in just 2 weeks with these new lights. They're not expensive. They're really nice, There are some limitations about the size. They're 4-foot lights, so that can be a little bit limiting. But I think most people can make it work, especially if you have like my 20 longs. If you have multiple tanks, you can span them across different tanks, or 4-foot tanks are perfect for. I know not a lot of people have 4-foot shrimp tanks, but any planted tank for that matter. So, but everything I talk about here mainly pertains to shrimp and how it affects the shrimp. So, I hope you guys enjoyed, and thank you guys for watching. Bye.